Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Looks like we are live. Before we start our live stream today, I would like to ask you, my audience, my best audience ever, to give me a sign. How is the video and how is the audio? Because from my side, I have a little challenge here. So just give me some feedback in the live chat and I will continue with the interview. Thank you for waiting, Tom. I appreciate. I'm checking if sound is good. Okay, so let's start.
Let's see how we do.
Let's give it a try. If the connection is not the finest, then we will reschedule with my guest, Tom LUONGO, who is one of the best financial experts and geopolitical analysts. And I haven't seen Tom for almost 6 months. I just look at my channel. I said our last interview was like 5 months ago. So because of my connection today, yes, flies, I would like to ask Tom some questions, and then I will be pausing because there is delay with the sound. So Tom, how have you been in United States of America? General question.
It's every day is opposite day in Trump's new America. Whatever Trump decides to do, the powers that be want to do the exact opposite. So that's hilarious and kind of sad, but also, oddly encouraging, because every day their opposition to him is, well, gets more and more pathetic, to be honest with you. So from that perspective, as an American, and I know this is not necessarily a particularly popular opinion around the world, but as an American, I'm okay with everything that's happening right now, because for the first time in pretty much most of my life, I'm watching an American president and administration act on behalf of Americans without for the most part, without all of the hubristic imperial stuff on top of it, right? It was always America first, but to take over the world, which is not really what I'm seeing now. It's a different tenor and a different different tone than we've seen previously, and especially on the domestic front. So on the international front, it's challenging with Trump, because he's actually quite straightforward, but he acts very mercurial, right? He knows exactly what he wants to do, but he's willing to lie strategically on a day-to-day basis to get what he wants. And he does it on purpose. And it drives everybody crazy, because they're trying to react to him in real time. And the last thing you want to do actually is react to Donald Trump in real time, and think about the big arc of what it is that he's trying to accomplish. And if you do that, he makes a lot more sense, and there's actually not nearly as much confusion as you might think. So at first blush.
Yep, and it's a global takedown of darkness, I say, of a deep state. So it's an interesting process. Not many understand, but you are one of those who does, and I'm so glad to connect with you today. So Tom, definitely today I will be asking you a few questions about Fed, about Jerome Powell, about the dollar, but I want to start with the EU, because we have to start with the EU. So I have a little note here prepared for this question. So the deal, the MAGA deal, I call it, was signed with EU, US, by Trump, and as I call her, Ursula the Witch, Ursula von der Leyen, in Scotland. Right. So here is this deal. You're welcome to correct me anytime I say it if I'm mistaken here. It's a $2 trillion deal. What EU will offer to United States? So EU will face 15% tariff base on the exports to the United States. This is what America is gaining, what US is gaining. Also, the EU has promised to buy $750 billion worth of American energy products like oil and gas. And the EU will also invest $600 billion US economy into US economy buying US military equipment. So what does EU get in exchange? Well, it gets this 15% of tariffs, 15% tariffs, because if they wouldn't sign this deal by August 1st, it would be 30. My question here is, Tom, question is simple. Has Trump just defound the EU?
I'm sorry. Say that. Repeat that, please, because you broke up.
Has he defound EU? Has Trump defound EU? Like you defund the police, he just defound EU.
Yeah, has he? What he's done is yes. I mean, the way von der Satan, this is what I like to call her, termed it. Well, we're just rebalancing things. Well, no, she pretty much got destroyed in trade negotiations in many ways, the same way that the Japanese did. Not to say that the Japanese aren't our partners; they are. But yeah, you know, the situation is as follows. Europe wants no relationship with Russia. They want war with Russia. And their only option then, if they're going to cut off their source of energy from the, if they're not going to buy energy from the Russians, and Trump's already cut deals with most of the Middle East, and they're all of their gambits, and I mean this in a subtle way, which people don't, which it's really hard to see it, but the way I see it is, like France and Britain and as a proxy for the EU going back 150 years, have been trying to get a hold of all of the oil and gas wealth in the Middle East, and they've created chaos all over the place. And as far as I can tell, they've got their fingers in everybody's pie. That includes in Iran, that includes in Israel, that includes in Syria, that includes in Jordan and Qatar and everywhere else. And so, but the way the Iran-Israel conflict worked itself out, which is effectively Trump said, look, I'm in charge of this thing, and that's enough. And, enough on both sides. You're both, I can't deal with either of you. And I know that's not a popular opinion. Most people think that he, came to Bibi Netanyahu's aid and yada, yada, yada. Like, no, the threat to Israel was real from Iran's missile technology. He had to, in effect, what he had to do was thread the needle where both sides got a punch in the mouth and expended a whole lot of weapons that they can't resupply anytime soon. And now the conflict, for all intents and purposes, is a low-grade conflict going forward. I mean, and what's really funny is while this was going on and while it was resolving itself, and I'll get back to the EU in a second because it's important, is that while this was resolving itself in the last couple of days of the quote unquote 12-day war, I kept saying, okay, this thing looks over now, right after Trump, bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. But we're going to find out who works for whom as by who's trying to restart the conflict. Because as far as I'm concerned, Israel-Iran is a European-led conflict that is always supposed to be a problem, so that way they can spin up at a moment's notice and then get everybody and then get all the major powers to commit resources to and effectively bankrupt themselves by trying to stabilize either Israel on one side or Iran on the other, or and control and keep the shipping lanes open and all the rest of it. No different than India, Pakistan, or India, China, or North and South Korea, or hell, the US and Canada at this point, right? So when you view these conflicts that way, you realize that what you have to do if you're going to try and solve them is solve them definitively, or at the very least out everybody's interests on both sides. And that's basically what we've seen. So that was Israel-Iran. And that by doing that and by not resolving, but for the most part, resolving it the way he did and cutting all the deals he did across the Middle East, news for you, Europe's got no access to energy coming out of the Middle East anymore because the Saudis are investing in the United States. We're controlling the shipping, like and if Iran is then, and if the axis of resistance of Iran can no longer cause chaos in the region, well then, the oil flows to the highest bidder and that includes Iran being able to get back into the global economy as long as they start acting like a normal country. I'm not saying that Israel doesn't have to do the same thing. Of course they do. They're not acting like a normal country, and the way they're going about things right now, they're going to be everybody's most hated asset or hated neighbor in the world, right? So, like, you cut off the collateral, the potential collateral for Europe that way. They don't have any energy that way. You've got the Brexit divorce agreement ending in June of 2026, at which point the European Union will have no say over what the UK does internally, other than if they have captured Parliament for their purposes, i.e. in the body of Keir Starmer, previously Rishi Sunak, previously Theresa May, yada, 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 all those Blairites and all the rest of them. Cut off that, you now open up the potential for the North Slope, right, off of Scotland. That energy can flow around the world. They don't want to do any business with the Russians, so who else can they buy their energy from but the United States? And they designed this policy. They set this policy up, and Trump said, okay, that's what you want? You want war? Great, you're paying us for it. And he's angry because he knows, and this is the other angle on this, he's angry about all of this, for not just because of what he says publicly, which is that they treat us badly on trade and they owe us all this money for rebuilding them and everything else. That's the popular story. The real story is he sent his DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, to London 2 weeks ago, who then showed everybody what they have, and a week later started showing it to the rest of the world, and everybody was like, uh-oh, he's got us dead to rights. Because the entire tone of geopolitical commentary and actions by all of these people has changed overnight. Ursula von der Leyen went from talking tough about Trump and we're going to negotiate and blah, 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 to, mommy, and I mean this sincerely. I'm like, there's only one thing that can do that. And that's you find out that they tried to steal the 2016 election, the stuff we know about Obama and Brennan, Clapper and Comey and all those guys. They absolutely stole the 2020 election. And I think Giorgia Meloni has the goods over in Italy. And then they've most likely interfered heavily in House and Senate races in 2022 and 2024 to leave Trump with this thin majority that he had that the Republicans lost, had a thin majority in the House in 2022, and then wound up with a 3-seat majority in 2024 when Trump wins a historic landslide. Anybody who's ever looked at electoral politics, especially, vote totals in the United States, all of that is 3 to 5 sigmas off the board in terms of like how electoral politics normally works. And everybody knows the math doesn't make any sense other than through vote harvesting and U.S. taxpayer money being laundered through Europe and back into the United States, given to the DNC to steal elections. And I think they're all guilty. I think he has the goods on all of them. And he's done with all of this. Now, at the same time, he's got to deal with Vladimir Putin, who's been dealing with a very weak Biden administration and an implacably hostile EU, who Putin knows has no ability to really fight a war against him in Ukraine unless the Americans come in. So did Trump get everything he wanted and gave von der Leyen a soft guarantee that any play that they make to try and stabilize the front line in Ukraine, that the U.S. would back, is similarly to the way he backed Netanyahu in Israel? Backed, meaning give them just enough support to get themselves enmeshed in something they can't win, but also stops Putin dead in his tracks and lets him know he can't go any farther. That's effectively how he handled Iran-Israel. And I'm beginning to think that that's the way he's going to handle Russia-Ukraine, unless he and Putin already have a deal worked out, which is my base case, to be honest with you, Anya. But I have to explore the possibility that it's something worse than that. Okay. So I hope it's the latter. I fear it's the former. just to put it in blunt terms. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Can I just say thank you for mentioning this at the end, that unless is truly what I believe. And I just look at things from a little bit different angle than
Sure.
You're an expert and etc. But I look more intuitively and also from a different dimension, if I may say. I know it sounds strange, but I just say it. I look at this that they are literally playing this game. It's a game. I literally look at it. They are playing the game. I know there are people dying, but it's a game, and what is at stake is humanity. That's what's at stake. And it's not just the mother Russia, all right? It's humanity. It happened to be that Russia stood up to the evil demonic forces, read Ukraine or location, or maybe not the corporate, but let's say one of the representations in Ukraine. Russia stood up to it and is cleaning that area. But now I'm looking at this as Trump is playing this game with Putin, in my opinion. I'm thinking to myself, so wait a second. If EU is going to sign this mega deal with Trump, and of course, most of the countries like, Orban is against it, Meloni is talking about it, even Macron is talking something that he's not happy about it. All right, so they don't like it. Very good, no one likes it. But the point is, if EU or Ursula the Witch, or as you call it differently, wants to completely turn the EU into world war economy, focus on war, at this point, how they are able to sustain it. I'm not an expert in finances. I don't think they can. And now she's even talking about all of a sudden, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, Zelensky is corrupted. Like all of a sudden, no, we're not going to support Ukraine because Ukraine is corrupted. What are we talking about, Tom? What the heck? 3 years and a half or whatever later, and like all of a sudden Zelensky is corrupted and the government, like you're not money laundering with him, like, hello, right? So I don't know, because it just
I think you're right on. I think you're right on it. Like, there's been a fundamental shift in the way the EU is talking about things. And look, they have a plan internally. They want to launch the digital euro. They want to effectively monetize and mobilize everybody's savings. They want to consolidate political and financial power in the European Commission and the ECB. They want to get rid of the member central banks. They want to get rid of neuter, effectively, member parliaments and governments. And they know that they have that in order to get that done, they need to bring the situation domestically. I use the word domestically to cover the EU 28 or 27 as low as possible to get them to accept, to get the people to accept, in their words, well, if they're starving to death and they can't breathe, if we offer them a can of air, even though that air is tainted, they'll take it, which is what they're trying to do. And Trump is like, yeah, that's, if you want to do that, that's fine, but you're going to pay us on the backside and we're going to wash our hands of all of this. I think that, that in order for that, like, they can do that, but they're going to be on their own because they don't have a source of collateral. They're not going to be able to sell these any European Commission issued bonds to any investor outside of the European Union, because who's going to buy them at this point? Bond yields in Europe are fictitious at the rate that they're trading at. The bond prices are insanely overvalued. So the only lifeline that they have is Jerome Powell's high interest rate policy in the Federal Reserve, where they're gorging themselves on U.S. Treasuries to prop up their balance sheets by getting interest payments and transfer payments that way. Now, that's the downside to Powell's high interest rate policy. And notice how, because Trump wants to remake the Fed and do away with the Fed as it's currently constituted, which is far away from its original conception and mandate, the 1913 Fed looks nothing like the modern 2025 Fed. When you look at it that way, he has to go on a PR campaign to the normie American to explain to them, no, the Fed's really part of the problem. In order for me to fix the United States, I have to fix the Fed as well. Jerome Powell is, of course, going to be the scapegoat for this, because Powell had to raise interest rates to starve the world of offshore dollars and get offshore lending under control and back under the Fed's control in such a way that our markets internally could price themselves properly based on our risk profile, not the world's profile. And that was stage one. Stage two is now, turn the Fed into the bad guy and reform it. And I think Powell's okay with that. That's his job. That's what he was hired to do in 2017, and he's done it. He doesn't need to be the guy to be there while the Fed gets reformed. As a matter of fact, you want a different guy in charge of that process, because, that's not Powell's job. He's not built for it. His tenure at the Federal Reserve, was not, it doesn't make any sense for that guy to do that job. You always bring in a new guy to do the new thing. Powell's term is up sometime before May of next year. He may resign between now and then. He's not going to resign tomorrow. He's going to fight Trump for as long as he needs to in order to keep capital markets as calm as possible, because capital markets still don't trust Trump. So the way you thread this needle is you attack Powell in order to run the PR campaign that the Fed needs to be reformed, while Powell goes out and keeps capital markets relatively calm, while Trump reorganizes the fiscal side of the U.S. Monetary problem. Right? You fix the fiscal position by changing the way we generate revenue, how much money we're spending, what we're spending that money on, blah 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 blah. All the things that he's doing. While Powell just kind of says, you know what? Nope, not moving. Now, the downside to that is because of the interest rate differential between the ECB and the Fed, there's a whole lot of, carry trade, free money being made by a lot of people in the process. But, it's a bad, he inherited a bad situation. Trump did and Powell did. They're making the best of, what was a very bad situation. A bad fiscal situation, a bad monetary situation. You had bad inflation. It needed to all be wiped out. So the EU has played this as well as they could to this point, right? They've extended and pretended to this point through yield curve control, through the ECB, and all of the things that they've done, the currency arbitrage and the buying unbelievable amounts of treasuries over the last 4 years, like $1.4 trillion worth across the entire EU and British and Bank of England subsidiary space. That would include things like the British Virgin Islands, Bermuda, the Caymans, yada, yada, yada. Canada, Maron, Canada. How many treasuries Canada's bought. And now they're stuck with these things at, 4.5%. But, all that, they thought they were going to be able to point those treasuries back at the United States and dump them and hold that as leverage over Trump in terms like, yeah, no, not happening. Not happening at all. You owe us and you're going to pay. And it was a bluff. And the bluff, I really am beginning to believe, is that he's got them dead to rights personally. Ursula von der Leyen should go to jail for the rest of her life for the deals she made with Pfizer alone. Okay? Forget the amount of insanity relative to how the vote totals were manipulated going through Italy. They all went through Italian servers. And they did that. And you know why they did that? They did that to keep Italy on the hook so that Italy wouldn't leave. Because they could be blackmailed with this. The Italian government could be blackmailed with, oh, by the way, you guys are on the hook for what happened, because all the Dominion data was routed through Italy. And that's the kind of devious stuff that people like Sergio Mattarella and Matteo Renzi and all those lowlifes that work in Rome do in order to maintain power. That edifice is falling apart as well. I still say that the now that I think about it, the biggest tell is going to be whether Mattarella leaves the scene for health reasons or family reasons or something in the near future. I think where I think we're very close to that, to be honest with you. If that happens, everything changes up in Brussels. And I think old coalitions are going to start breaking. Like I can see the European People's Party like splintering, which is where von der Leyen's base is. Because how are you going to arm twist anybody after this deal, the weak no confidence vote that she just went through, and then the fact
another
that
one, another confidence vote that somehow miraculously she survived again.
Of course, but the point being, real quick, Anya, and then I'll turn the microphone back over, is how many people were involved in the cover up on the American elections, or money laundering through Ukraine, and all of it. All of these things went through, and how much of that went through Obama, and how much was Obama doing in real time after he left office? Because that leaves a paper trail. There's money there. Money leaves footprints. I think that, when you put all of that together, that all of that stuff that was like, we could see it, but we couldn't quite see it. Now it's like happening. We're seeing the reflection of a shift in power. And so the people who have been the gadflies of the European Union over the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years are going to wind up being the power brokers. And you have weak governments in the Netherlands, France, Germany, the UK, right? You have a relatively strong, relative to everybody else's governments, Italy's government looks positively sanguine, stable for the first time in since, Mussolini, right? You know what I mean? It's insane. The Italians have had 60 governments in 85 years? It's ridiculous, right? So, what used to be the political ability is Germany is now the big problem.
Can I just say about Meloni? I'm sorry, but I don't trust her either. I think she flip-flops a lot, and she looks like she smokes the same what Zelensky does.
Well, I think that it's two things. She flip-flops because she's in a very dangerous position. She's in a very tenuous position. The fact that Giorgia Meloni is still in power with a 31% with basically the amount of approval rating that she entered office with is nigh on to an Italian miracle. Okay. The second thing is, you don't think they would spike this woman's drink? You don't think they wouldn't drug her at an opportune moment? Because that one clip that everybody saw where she was freaking out, that's the only time I've ever seen her like that. She's usually very calm and collected. So when you see an outlier like that, you shouldn't immediately distrust it or think of it as an operation against her. And then when it shows up everywhere and everybody's talking about it, who do you think did that one?
Very good point.
I don't know, but it's a 7-letter word that starts with B and ends in S, ends in H, has a T and a couple of I's in there too. It's the British. This is a classic MI6 thing. I don't care if I'm wrong about it. It could be Mossad, could be friggin' French intelligence. Hell, it could have just been Emmanuel Macron who spiked her drink. Doesn't matter.
Okay, so
hell, it could have been Italians. Her own people hate her. Her own people in Rome hate her. So she has traitors everywhere. Matteo Renzi. I don't trust Salvini as far as I can throw him. He's compromised to hell and gone. Meloni has no friends in Rome, and yet somehow she's still in power. She has a cabinet that is compromised. There's only 2 or 3 members of her cabinet you can even think about trusting. Crescetto, and I think there's one other guy. The Crescetto's the Minister of Defense, and there's maybe one other guy. I got people on the ground in Italy. They're like telling me, the situation there is very bad, and the fact that she's still alive, I think we have to thank Trump for alive, meaning she's in power. I think we can thank Trump for that, because Trump has helped solidify her position. Remember, the Italian mob in Rome, it's got tendrils in New York City. Just saying, right?
So here is, let me ask you this. Before we go to Fed, I want to ask you some questions about Fed. When Trump was in Scotland, because they just left, I love Scotland, by the way, he was there, and there was a moment when he was playing golf on his golf course, and people have gathered because he had some nice welcome, and he's in that little town where he has his resort. And can I just tell you, this is personal story, Tom. Yep. When I was in Scotland in January, my taxi driver was talking about Trump's property, because people know him. Scottish people like who work in this industry, they know him. And he was really praising the hotel. He was praising the service, the people, the guests who arrived there. And, they talk about Trump very, very highly, great employer, etc. But where I'm going with this story is when he was playing that golf, probably you've seen it, there are people who gathered outside of that property and they were shouting, "We love you, Trump. Don't trust Starmer. Don't trust Starmer. Right. He's a liar, etc., etc." So why I'm telling you this, why we're discussing this, is because I think what this game, this spectacle, this theater is about, really. He is, in my way, that's how I see it, he's empowering regular citizens of the countries, the people, presenting them the shenanigans, the way how those so-called leaders are not really leaders, but you know what I mean, they are. And it's almost like you have to separate Ursula the witch from the rest of people in other countries in EU. The same like with Starmer, because Starmer is shaking his pants next to Trump, pretending as if he's tough and he's completely like a little boy, and then you have people who cannot stand him, who literally cannot take him anymore, any day, any longer. So looking at this, I'm trying to see it in a way that I have this live stream is like slowing down. I can hear myself. I'm trying to see this as a dismantling EU in a different way. There is an economical side, there is a political side, but there is also grassroots movement, down to earth people who live in the country and what they do about it.
Yeah, no, I see exactly. I've been thinking about this for a while. I'm going to go back to the transition. I'm going to go back to December when he sent Elon Musk over to England and set him out as the attack dog against Keir Starmer. Now, I had always, had in the back of my head that Trump was Scottish, or his mom was Scottish, and, that he likes Scotland and he's at a resort there and a golf course. And, and I always pegged him as a bit of a royalist. But, the question then is, what king? And I don't think, apparently Donald Trump, through his mother, is a direct descendant of the House of Stuart. Not to say that he's going to be named king or anything. That's not what I'm getting at, because his mom renounced her citizenship. He's not capable of being King of England. That's not where this is going. But there's the House Stuart and there's the House Windsor, which in the House Windsor is German, Dutch, not English. And, first I wanted to say, is he going after Starmer because he's going after City of London in order to get control of the finances? We had the run on the LBMA all during Q1. Thousands of tons of gold are flowing into the United States out of London. Yada yada yada. There's that angle. First, there's that. First, you drain them of their money, right? then you drain them of their real wealth, cut off their free money that they're getting from American taxpayers, all this stuff. But as time has gone on, I then watched how he, said, we're going after Canada. We want Canada. Make it the 51st state, right? Greenland. We want Greenland too. Now, we want that for strategic reasons because we want to be able to put missile defense systems in Greenland and preclude ever being attacked by Europe ever again. The Russia is not the enemy. He knows that. China is not even really the enemy. China is a problem and a big problem, but we can fix our relationship with China. If we stop being inherently globalist, then, all we have to do is tell China where they're allowed to go and where their sphere of influence ends, and then we'll find out whether the Chinese want to fight a war or not. I don't think they do, but they certainly have the manpower to do so if they wanted to, because they have a crap ton of people they don't frankly need, and don't ever think that regime, that the CCP doesn't look at a couple 100 million, surplus males as potential cannon fodder. It has to be put up on the whiteboard, right? Doesn't have to happen, needs to be put up on the whiteboard to be discussed, or at least considered. But what I'm getting at is that the longer this has gone on, and the more I've watched Trump operate, the more I think that he's trying to free the Commonwealth from the clutches of old Europe.
100%, Tom. 100%.
Yeah, from Luxembourg to Belgium to the Dutch, all of it, and that's what I'm seeing. And if that's the case, cool. Because my friend Ian Burlingame and I have talked about this. I don't know if you've encountered Ian yet, but he talks about a lot of this. He's talked about a lot of these things this way. I have a Canadian patron who did a great recent post privately on our server explaining the difference between the Crown of Chancery and how the Crown and the royal family are actually split into two administratively different legal entities, which is how Parliament is able to do what they do. I only understood about half of it. I understood just enough of it to go, oh, look, it's way more complicated than it needs to be. And a bunch of evil globalist shitbags took control of England. Okay, that's all. I mean, I need to know the details, but for this level of analysis, where we are when we're talking about purely inductive reasoning at this point, not necessarily germane. Certainly worth everybody's exploration that's listening to the podcast, including me to go and do some more review. But that being said, this is, I think, all part of the reason why Trump wants to solve so many of these problems so quickly, because the Brexit divorce agreement between the UK and the EU ends on June 16th of next year. Remember, to leave the EU, the countdown clock starts 10 years from the vote. That the country that wants to leave is on the hook for any harm done to the EU for 10 years. This is just, I remember people telling me when I was covering Brexit, when I was, literally making my bones, talking to 40 freaking people, but I was covering Brexit every day. I was live streaming like practically every day, watching Theresa May, everything that was happening with Theresa May and how she was like trying to sell the country out. And I covered it at nauseum at a level that I understood. I learned stuff about British politics. I like no Briton wants to know this stuff, right? I just want to get, I just want to go about my day and go to the pub at the end of the night, right? But I remember people telling me then don't get too happy about them, quote unquote, getting Brexit done under Boris Johnson. We still have 7 years of hell to deal with these people. And they explained it to me, in Twitter DMs and emails and stuff. Like, there's 7 more years of this nonsense that's got to go on. So think about the timeline between now and then. June 16th, 2026. The UK is no longer beholden to the European Union in any way. And on July 4th, the United States celebrates 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Is Trump trying to effect the final independence of English society from continental Europe? It's a good question. But if you look at what he's doing, this is why his relationship with Putin is so important, and why Putin has to, at some point, trust that Trump is not going to overstep. And this is a hard thing. It's going to be a hard thing for Putin to navigate, because he's got hardliners screaming at him that the West can't be trusted. He's got his own experience with being betrayed by Europe over and over and over again, especially Angela Merkel. But, you know, about 2 or 3 months ago, I had a conversation, my partner in crime at Gold Ghosts and Guns, Dexter White, and we chat all the time, right? We get on the phone and we sit and chat for 2-3 hours, and we talk about all manner of things. We were talking about Russia. We were talking about, this was just before or just during the Iran-Israel conflict. It was just before the Iran-Israel thing went haywire. And he said, if you look at what's happening today, it almost looks like Trump and Putin met, put together a to-do list that, we're going to each kind of knock a thing off the to-do list in order to build some trust. So I'm going to do this one thing, and then you're going to do something. And I'm going to do this, and you're going to do that. And I'm going to do this, and you're going to do that. And if either of us renege, whoa, we got to go back to the beginning, and we got to start all over again. And in some ways, I think, the question then is, has Putin reneged on that arrangement with Trump, the way he's taken advantage of the weakness of in Ukraine, with the way he's bombed, way he's attacked targets inside Ukraine, especially since Iran-Israel. It's honest. It's an honest question, and we need to work it out. I want to believe everything's on the up and up, or is moving forward. But again, something else that Ian Burlingame put in my head that I can't not stop considering, which is, look at what Trump did in Israel. He got everybody to throw a whole bunch of weight, and now that conflict can't really spin out of control unless somebody wants to go nuclear. Right? And no one wants to go nuclear, because the whole point of nuclear weapons is to constantly threaten and use them as a means by which to get some other guy to do something dumb in fear of the nuclear weapon. Right? That's been the narrative. That's been taken away from Israel. But the Iranians keep making, dudes, what are you doing? You got the best of all possible worlds. That tells me that they're still working for somebody else. But you can't fix Iran, Israel, Qatar, UAE, all these other places, Singapore, Hong Kong, all of it, until you actually fix MI6. Because don't kid yourself. HSBC, littered to the gills with MI6 guys. Standard Chartered, same thing. Anything going on in Dubai, same thing. I still go back to the Hong Kong riots in 2019 over the extradition treaty back to China. That did not require kids running around, Antifa, or the Hong Kong equivalent of Antifa, running around in black bloc, beating up businessmen in the streets of Hong Kong. That was a color revolution attempt, and it failed. And it was a color revolution by the British, because who was going to be extradited back to China behind the wall? You think it was going to be the 20-year-olds caught for jaywalking? No, it was the guy who works the Vietnam desk at Standard Chartered in Hong Kong, who actually works for MI6, and they've got him dead to rights on X, Y, and Z money laundering or drug running or weapons running, whatever those guys were doing. And those are the guys that they were going to get pulled back behind the wall. And the minute that extradition treaty was put in front of the Hong Kong government, thing exploded. So never, ever think for a minute that the old British network is gone, because it's not. That has to be destroyed. How do you destroy it? Well, they overstepped their bounds badly in the 2016 election, because the whole thing was run out of the CIA's British office, London office, by Gina Haspel and everybody else, and Stefan Halper, who was a friggin' MI6 asset, blah, 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 blah. All of it. And so I think Gabbard went to London and dropped it all on the table and went, you work for us now. This shit is over. This conversation, to quote Fight Club, is over. We're done. You work for us now, or you're all going to jail. So knock it off. And the minute she left, the tone coming out of British media has changed. Somebody noted to me today, go watch the video of the press conference where Trump struggle sessions Starmer, and the British media was asking Keir Starmer about how he felt watching Donald Trump get rid of all of these illegals. That would have never come out of British press. They would have just thrown hostile questions at Trump and covered Starmer. Starmer's being liquidated. The word has gone out to British intelligence that Starmer needs to go. And so that means that there's going to be another election in Britain, and Labour's going to get trounced. And then after that, we'll see what happens. We'll see. I don't know that William is any prize to get rid of to replace Charles, but he's got to be better. Can't be any worse.
So Tom, I will mute you for a moment because there is an echo when I speak. That was brilliant what you just said, all of it. So apparently 72 countries plus the United States have had their elections rigged by the same group of people, by the same systems. Now, this is really massive. This is global, okay? This is not just about Obama or a certain group making some changes or doing some shenanigans in the United States. Absolutely. You know what? I'm not American citizen, but I would be furious, abusing Americans, people, the citizens' right to vote. How dare you? Okay? And it's not just there, it's in 72 other countries. So we have all those schmucks. I'm sorry, I muted you because there's an echo. There are all those schmucks in so many countries, in those positions, placed in those positions just because a certain group of, let's say, 13 families or whoever, whatever demons wanted them to be there. So let's just step away from a moment. I'm thinking, okay, so if this is all coming out, this wouldn't even come out. There would not even be a conversation about it. There would not even be Trump in the White House in the first place. Let's start with it. If that energy would be still in charge, if that darkness would be still in power, it wouldn't be. Just wouldn't be. So to me, they already lost, and we are watching the chicken running around with the head like that. So now let's smoothly shift to the election change in UK and other countries. We just had presidential election in Poland. I'm not saying he's perfect, but Trump said he's gonna win. So let's see. He won. But the point is, everything will change. I hope no more EU, and I hope every country will have a better government and people will stand up, and we should not even believe the governments. We should really be our own leaders, but that's another story. I want to ask you about Fed. To me, that guy, Jerome Powell, first, as I read his bio on Never to Trust Wikipedia, it says that Biden appointed him first, then he was during Trump, then he's there and he's not cooperating, and the interest rates, etc. But to me, he's like the front face of that entire crooked system, this old monetary system that abuses people. Because to me, this is abuse, this whole Federal Reserve Bank. There's nothing federal, there's nothing reserve. It's like, what's the freaking point? Just like be a slave and keep on working until you die and we don't need you anymore. So, Tom, my question here is, when this whole Fed was created, that was kind of like this old formula, as I understand, problem, reaction, solution, right? Because there was this reaction to some tension or some fears in the world or whatever, and they created this system. What is the point of this Fed to exist? And I'm speaking completely unprofessionally. I know I don't even look at the live chat, because I just want to understand why this whole Fed needs to exist anymore. There is a Treasury Department of United States. They can change the dollar, back it with gold or silver or something that is actually of value. And why to continue with this Federal Bank Reserve? Why to have Powells or people like him in that position? That is my question. And one more thing before I unmute you. Do you think he's like Trump is gradually changing Fed, or he is? Why he's even transforming it? Like, can he just completely close this whole business?
No. Okay. The first things first is that no, he cannot. That's the first thing. The second thing is yes, he is going to reform the Fed. It's pretty obvious from everything he said, Bessent has said, what they're talking about. Third, Jerome Powell was the first Gentile that actually had the Federal Reserve. Let's put the cards on the table. Jerome Powell is an 8th generation American. Okay. Scott Bessent is an 8th generation American too, by the way. That means they trace their family heritage back to the 1600s. Okay. Powell was hired by Trump, put in place by Wall Street to affect the change, which I've discussed it many times, to pull us off of pricing dollars in the European Eurodollar system at the City of London and bring it back to the United States so that our monetary policy under the Federal Reserve is at least handled domestically. Now, from the moment I figured out this shift from LIBOR, which is what used to price dollars, to SOFR, the SOFR, which is what we have today, the first thing that popped into my head was, we don't even need the Fed funds rate. And I asked Danielle DiMartino Booth this on my podcast when I had her. I said, like, am I crazy about this? But it seems to me that, like, with SOFR in place, we don't even need a Fed funds rate. She's like, well, yeah, you're right, but they'll never give up that kind of power. I'm like, fair point, right? So we have a debt indexing rate, which is a market-driven rate. We don't even need the Fed other than to maintain it within what the Fed thinks is the right rate of interest, the right cost of money. Now, we all know that, I'm Austro-libertarian. I'm not a big fan of this idea of there not being a free market in interest rates. There's certainly not a free market in money. I hate the Federal Reserve. But, and this is a big but, we live in a world with very powerful central banks. And you have the most powerful central bank in the world, and it's a war between the central banks. Do you give up your army when there's a war? I'm asking that. I need you to answer that question before I go any further. Do you give up your army when you're on the eve of war? Do you just disband your army and throw it away? No, you don't. that's a rhetorical question. You know you can't do that. You've got to use the thing that you have in the most advantageous way possible for you until it's no longer an asset, and then you throw it away. One of the themes that I've been hitting on throughout most of 2025 across almost every domain is rapidly depreciating asset. I don't care what it is. The old world is dying. The old architecture is dying. I don't care what angle you look at it from, geopolitically, domestically, blah, blah, blah. Everything is aging out. Everything is going through an obsolescence period, including the Federal Reserve, including the concept of the federal of a central bank as constituted similarly to the bank, the formation of the Bank of England in 1694, which is all downstream of this. Everything we're dealing with today is all downstream of that, and previously to that, the Dutch central bank. It failed, but then they perfected it with the Bank of England. Now, of course, happened 6 years after the Glorious Revolution, which brought William of Orange to the throne of England. Ding! Now, let's back up for a second. Jerome Powell coming out of, now in 2022 or 2021, Powell's first term is up. And what nobody wants to remember, because they just look up, as you did, look up on the Wikipedia page or yell at me on Twitter, and you're not the first person to say this. Like, yeah, but Biden reappointed Powell. I was like, yeah, after a 6-month-long slog to try and get rid of him, because Powell had already started tightening monetary policy without having raised interest rates. Powell's so friggin' good, he changed the world with a 5 basis point move and a technical interest rate. Now, and he stripped over $2.5 trillion out of the global financial system and brought inflation down almost immediately. And then he raised interest rates and said, it's all your problem now. Because I got banks that are starving over here that need capital that they can go buy, they can go get some, I got insurance companies that need 5% returns. But it's gonna crush the small banks. There's no good answers here. Like, every action is a trade-off. I shore up the insurance companies and the pension funds, and I'm putting the small banks in. I'm drilling massive holes in the balance sheets of the small banks. I'm also giving the European Union, as I described earlier, every opportunity to then dump their trade surplus into U.S. Treasuries and buy a metric ass load of these things, and then use them to get returns on the money because they're getting paid interest. Where do you think that interest on the debt is going? It's going to Europe, because they bought $1.4 trillion net of U.S. Treasuries over the last 4 years. But Powell's either, what do I do? Or do I shit or go blind? Like, what do I do? I got to do one thing. Well, the right thing to do is raise the cost of capital and try and wring the leverage out of the system, which then rings all of the NGO money starts to dry up. No way can the Biden administration borrow $3 trillion a year or $4 trillion a year, which is what they wanted to do. They only spent 1.7, but they wanted to spend 4 a year. Why did they want to do that? Because they wanted to force the Fed back to the zero bound, and they wanted to liquidate the United States. That's why. Biden only finally put Powell up for reconfirmation for a second term after the FOMC said, look, he's our chairman. Until he gets a reconfirmation, until he gets a confirmation hearing, we're not accepting anybody else. And at that point, and they couldn't do that until Powell's term was over in February. And then the Senate reconfirms him. But Biden didn't want to do this. Obama wanted Lael Brainerd. Okay. So, and who does Obama work for? The EU. Maron, this is not hard. Like, this is right in front of us. Powell had to do what he did. He literally drained the world of all of that capital, that liquidity, that trillions of dollars of money, that ocean of money. He drained 3/4 of it after COVID.
I have a question. Sorry to interrupt you now. So in a way, Powell, thank you for explaining this to me, because I had like a light bulb now. Trump, it's convenient. It's convenient inconvenience, but it's convenient to keep power in this position for Trump or whoever, this whole alliance, let's say, behind Trump, to expose the system to then, and as you said, to expose it, to present the system to the public, and then to use it to have a leverage, as you said, don't drop it yet, to transform it, to weaken or dismantle the main organ of the system, and then completely before 250-year America and 80th birthday, like that's it.
Way too quick. No, the Fed's not going away in 18. The Fed's not going away in 18 months or 9 months. That's not what's happening. Okay. The Fed is going to be around for a long time, but the Fed's role is going to be completely different. We just passed a trio of bills to change the nature of the US dollar. And it's not where gold bugs wanted to go, but it's what's happening. We're moving to a privately issued dollar by local banks in the form of stable coins. The Genius Bill provides for individual banks to issue their own US dollar stable coins. What is that? It's just banknotes. It's just a free banking system that we had in the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century before the Federal Reserve. Okay, where they could hold reserves in specie and then issue local currencies to do business locally. We had that in the United States. It's part of the reason why the United States became the United States. Okay, the stable coin, and this is all very early, and when we don't, and I don't have an hour to explain it all. So I want to put it in people's heads. You have to understand that what they're doing is central banks themselves are a depreciating asset. SWIFT, the payment system, is a depreciating asset. It's all being moved onto the blockchain, folks, whether you like it or not. It's all happening. Okay, it's all going to be tokenized. It's all going to go on a blockchain. It's most likely most of it is going to run on Ripple. Whether you like that or not, too, it doesn't really matter. Bitcoin will be collateral. Gold will be collateral. Maybe some silver, maybe some oil, maybe some other things will be collateral. But in the system, and certainly U.S. Treasuries will be collateral as well, because we're already watching how Tether USDT has operated as a hot spare, a hot money sink for U.S. Treasuries to liquefy the Bitcoin market. It's done a brilliant job of it. And now Tether's like jumping the leash and now is becoming its own big thing. And it's becoming its own rightful currency in unbanked portions of the world. Like you can buy tomatoes in Nigeria with Tether directly. Don't need to go to Bitcoin. Don't need to do anything else. But what are Tethers backed by? 85 to 90% short-term T-bills. So the US dollar or the US Treasury market is there in Nigeria or Ghana or wherever, Peru, in a way settling transactions from people who don't have bank accounts. And they're becoming their own reserve that way. Like their Tether wallet is the new decentralized version of the central bank. This is the interesting part about it. Powell's job was to drain the liquidity. Powell's job was to establish SOFR, which then takes the cost of dollars away from City of London, transfers it back to the United States money markets and repo markets, which is where it belongs, so that the interbank, the domestic interbank market can set the price for dollars and set the price for lending to local businesses. The Fed is still in the way because the Fed sets the Fed funds rate, which effectively sets a price floor or a price ceiling, effectively, and a range on the price of short-term T-bills. That's going to continue. That system is going to continue for a while. You first have to set up and explain to the average person that the Fed is the problem. Most people don't understand this. If they've interacted with it at all, they've interacted with it with Ron Paul and Ed the Fed. And I got news for you. Libertarians are 1% of the U.S. population. The average person doesn't want to get rid of the Fed. The average person doesn't even understand that the Fed exists. Doesn't understand how our monetary system works. You have to turn the Fed from a 595 issue, meaning 5% of the people want it and 95% of the people don't care, into an 80-20, where 80% of the people want it and 20% of the people don't. This is a classic Trumpian framework to understand how he frames issues. So he starts the process today in order to set the process in motion. And in behind the scenes, he has Scott Bessent, Jerome Powell sit down and figure out how they're going to wind down a lot of what the Fed does. I know Powell historically was a vicious critic of Bernanke and Yellen's tenures as Fed chair. Internally in the Fed, Powell never liked the 2% inflation mandate, never wanted to bail out, do the bailouts in 2008 and 2009. He was one of the hawks, along with Richard Fisher and a couple of others, who were the guys trying to hold the line against this insanity. So he was the perfect guy to bring in to do what he's done. But that's going to clash with what Trump wants to do. But as I said earlier, you've got Trump, Mr. Chaos. It's not like good cop, bad cop. It's more chaos cop and order cop. You've got Mr. Chaos goes out there, zippy with his pinwheel and a submachine gun, blowing shit up left and right. That's Trump. And then you've got Powell standing over there going, no, everything's fine. We've got a dual mandate over the Fed. The data's what it is. Everything looks good right now. On keeping capital markets from getting unnerved. Because if capital markets get unnerved, what's the first thing that's going to sell off? The long end of the U.S. yield curve. The 5-year, the 7-year, the 10-year, the 20-year, the 30-year. Which is where Trump wants to refinance our debt to. He wants to take the 1s and 2s that Janet Yellen issued during her tenure and turn them into 10s and 20s, which is why he wants interest rates at 2% or whatever, because he wants to take that slug of money and just refinance it at an incredibly low rate. Problem with that is you can't go to 2% unless you've got a crappy economy. Otherwise, the whole market the pricing structure of the market, the term market, the market doesn't buy that argument. You don't have low interest rates with a good economy. You have high interest rates. The demand for money should be high, and it would be high. And even if it was a private monetary system, it would be high. Now, if the Fed holds interest rates well above what the market wants to lend it at, where it thinks it's profitable, then you'll see private lending take off. As you and I, like if you wanted to buy a car, Anya, and I had a big chunk of capital sitting in a bank account making 3%, 4.5% in T-bills, or but I think but I'm okay with I can't do anything with this money. I'll lend it. You want to buy a car? I'm like, no, you're a good credit risk. I'll give you you're a friend. I'll do this for 3%. Or you want to start a business? I'm like, I'll give you a loan at 3% and 10% of the company. You'll get your capital at 3% plus 10% of the company, and you give up 10% of the company, and all of a sudden you got a 3% loan. And you'll have to go to the Fed for 5%, to the local bank for 6% because the Fed's at 4.5%, right? That's the situation. We're not in that. We're getting close to that situation in the United States right now. Okay, Russia's already there. Like, by real contrast, if you want to understand like how badly Elvira Nabiullina is torching the Bank of Russia. Now that I think about it, maybe that's the only reason that she's still there, because she's so incompetent. She's got interest rates at 18%. Private lending in Russia is like booming and like growing like 400% a year. People are just bypassing the central bank and like getting business loans done, which is great. It takes the power away from the central bank. And she just this morning, she held interest rates at 18% again. It's insane. The Russian economy doesn't deserve to be punished with 18% interest rates. Powell's doing what he's doing because he doesn't have the ability to keep the Fed independent while the data that he's supposed to look at to fulfill the mandate that he has doesn't look bad. He may be wrong, but he's not doing it out of spite. What he's doing is he's waiting for Trump to put wins on the board and for his new policies to show efficacy, which they're doing. We've got 3 good months in a row of the tariff revenues rising, prices aren't rising. We're not seeing a lot of inflation. We've got, plenty of income coming in. They've cut a lot of money out of the budget. He's cut trade deals with a lot of people. He's brought in tons of investment. But here's the thing. Every time Trump says, this country's going to bring in $500 billion worth of investment. Wow. Yeah. And that's going to be inflationary. Like massive demand for money. Unless you can figure out how to bring that money in and not raise prices. That's a more mean feat. And that's actually a better conversation for me to have on my podcast with people like Vince and Caitlin Long and other people. So, because they actually understand that stuff, I think, better than I do. So my point is that Powell has been the right guy for the job to this point. He's going to hold on to interest rates where he needs to hold. And by the way, him staying at 4.5% got Trump that trade deal with the EU the other day. Because him at 4.5%, tariffs, euro at $1.17. The euro's up 15% this year, plus the 15% tariff. 20% tariff. Like, how are you supposed to export anything to the United States? The euro is too expensive. If anything, what the strong euro does is buy you access to U.S. markets. It buys investment because you got a strong currency. You invest where the other currency is weak. You get more bang for the buck that way. Or in this case, the euro. You get more bucks for the euro, right? So Powell's getting ready. He's going to cut rates. I don't know how far he's going to cut before he leaves, or whether or not Trump runs him out on a rail and a big kayfabe, like Trump needs to be the victim and the good guy, and Trump then he needs a bad guy. And right now it's Jerome Powell. It's fine. Just to bring this back around, one last point so you understand what I'm talking about when I mean about currency arbitrage. What did the EU do with Brexit? Before the Brexit vote, they devalued the British pound versus the euro by 20%. They made the British pound 20% more expensive as a punishment for even holding the Brexit vote. And then they held it there for the last 9 years. Meaning Britons never got the dividend of leaving the EU by allowing the pound to fall where it should have gone to about $1.10 or 70 cents to the euro, so that investment from the United States and Europe could come into and rebuild Britain. No, they kept the pound high, making it expensive to live in Britain and impossible for anybody to invest there. And that was done. And that was why I think this is why they stole the election from Trump in 2020. And they put in Biden. Because the first thing Biden did was not cancel the Keystone Pipeline or reinstate CAFE standard. No, the first thing he did was he said, no trade deal with the UK unless they go back to the European Union. And
very interesting.
They destroyed Britain in the process. It was an absolute strip mining of the country. And Boris Johnson was complicit in it, and so was Rishi Sunak. And the only one who wasn't was Liz Truss. And aside from the fact that Liz Truss's global politics are distinctly neocon, that woman wanted to restore a proper Britain, proper British, investment plan. And everybody was like, no, it's terrible. We're all going to die. I'm like, yeah. When you hear that out of the European and British press, yeah, you know whose ox is being gored every time. They did this with tariffs and Trump. And guess what? He's right. And now everybody is all having to go, oh, I guess I was wrong. I'm like, yeah, you think? It's
Tom,
it's pathetic.
I want to ask you, because you literally channeled my last question for you. I had a video prepared with Trump. I'm not going to play it because it might take longer. But let me just ask you about this. It's actually about the dollar. When you look at the dollar, at the notes, at the bills, dollar bills, you see this is the Federal Reserve note. So the money is printed, it's not backed. And I'm talking again, as I'm not an expert, I'm just like regular person asking a question about the dollar, because this is printed money that is not backed by gold or silver or anything else. Is this going to, Trump actually addressed it, I'm not going to play this video. How is dollar, as we know it nowadays, this dollar, the Federal Reserve Bank dollar, going to go forward, or is going to be strong, weak, or there is going to be completely new treasury note ultimately that will be backed by gold or something of a value? This is my last question.
That's a more complicated question than you may think it is. The Federal Reserve, you are correct that the Federal Reserve note is probably going to be depreciated over time. Stablecoins will take market share from them in the domestic market. Okay, this is important to understand. The Fed is going to be reformed back to being a provider of its original conception of the lender of last resort in the commercial paper market, in the commercial repo market, not the U.S. Treasury market, domestically, while being the enforcer of the par value of the dollar in international markets, meaning foreign central banks and foreign creditors will have to go to the Fed to get dollars. But we're going to have a completely different system internally, in the same way that you have offshore yuan and onshore yuan, in the same way that you have, okay? We're moving to a two-tiered monetary system. Y'all will get Federal Reserve notes at best. We are going to get US dollar stablecoins. They will be backed by treasuries, whatever we want, treasuries, gold, Bitcoin, silver, whatever. And that will be based on whatever the bank in question, how they want to hold their reserves and how they want to run their business. We're trying to get back to net interest margin, where banks do classic community net interest margin banking. This is very important. This is a very important phrase, net interest margin, right? NIM banking. What is that? Simple, is what I described earlier. You come to the bank with a business loan. Right now, the bank can looks at your business plan and goes, yeah, that's got this amount of risk associated with it. I can get this money. I can get this return on this investment over here, or I can do this one. I'm going to have to charge you 6%. Right now, the reason I have to charge you 6% is because I got to pay my depositors half of that, because I got to pay them for their savings. Because the only thing I can lend out is what's in the bank, right? Minus a little bit of a multiplier. Hopefully a low multiplier, but that multiplier of how many dollars they lend out versus how many they have in reserve, that should be market driven, right? So the bank needs to charge 6% in order to make 3%, and then have the depositors make 3%. In effect, when you deposit your money in a savings account in a bank, you are legally you're an unsecured creditor of the bank, but really what you are is a shareholder in the bank. Because what you're saying to the bank is saying to you, look, if you put your money in our account, we'll give you 3% on your money because I know I can lend your money out at 6%, and we get 3 minus our costs, and you get 3, and you get the business loan. And we hope that that's the way it's supposed to work, right? Like we get back to 633 banking. Lend at 6 or buy at 3, lend at 6, be on the golf course by 3. It's the old adage about banking. It's supposed to be the simplest business in the world. We've made it unbelievably complicated because we allowed ourselves here, especially in the United States, to run this ridiculous central banking model. Again, nothing I've said about the Federal Reserve today should be taken as a defense of it. But I do believe that in the world that we live in today, with the way the world operates, until it operates differently, you will need to have a Federal Reserve making sure that your markets are relatively stable. What we want is a Federal Reserve that has America's interests at heart, and the hell with the rest of the world. The same way that the Bank of England should have England's, the UK's best interests at heart, or the Bank of Italy, or the Hungarian Central Bank, or the Bank of Thailand, or whatever. They should all be acting in their own best interests and not for someone else. And this is the big sin of the United States that needs to be expiated. We have run monetary policy and fiscal policy for the world. And it's caused untold amounts of damage and death and destruction and everything else. And it's not done a thing for Americans. Our lifestyle, our standards of living, relatively speaking, have dropped. No different than the farmers in the Cotswolds who can't grow food profitably. They've been destroyed by the Bank of England. Europeans are being destroyed by their central banks and by the ECB. Like, yes, this evil needs to go away, but we have to replace it with something else. One of the things you have to remember is being a critic of a system that's unjust is not enough. You have to have a plan in which to get out of the current system. And just saying, hey, let's just throw it all up to gold. Like the news for you. You do that and you get rid of the leverage and you put that kind of discipline on today's markets. And I'm not caring about dollars. And you and I aren't having this conversation. Because the only thing I'm stocking up on are bullets, toilet paper, canned sardines, and dog food. That's it. Okay? And I'm keeping my axe sharp to put wood in the stove in the wintertime. Like, that's the world you're living in. So we have a choice in front of us. We can either allow for a mild deflation, 5, 10, 15, potentially 15% asset correction across the board. Maybe that would be good. Introduce a little discipline into the world. We're starting to see a rollover in housing prices here in the U.S. Or we can try and keep the nominal values up because there's an ocean of money out there, and get wages to rise and people's personal profitability up. And how do you do that? You either keep wages flat and then cut their costs, meaning lower their tax bill, lower the regulatory burden to stop them from being able to build a business, create a banking system that keeps the money locally and reinvests the money locally so that you can rebuild Main Street. And what I see Trump putting in place in the United States is the model that will do that. And y'all just should watch us so that when y'all leave the European Union and it breaks down in the next few years, you can get back to business. Because that's what you should be doing. That's what you should be thinking in terms of. You're on the right path on it. But the order of operations of how you go from where we are to where we need to go, that's a very That's a very important path. And the United States being the biggest, most liquid, and most, for lack of a better term, we have the best legal structure for this. We have the best tax structure. We have the best governmental structure for this, where everybody else is offshore tax haven. For a reason. If we get our fiscal house in order, we will enforce fiscal discipline on the rest of the world, which will actually be liberating for all of fucking humanity. That's why the war is so, that's why as I've been studying this, and when first as a private citizen and now as a public commentator, older I get, the more I study it, the more I'm like, no, it's all about the money. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. And then everything else is downstream of that. And you start fixing the money, all these other problems will show up. You'll start to see geopolitical stress, and you'll start to see politicians lose their mind and try and backstab each other and all sorts of horrible things. And you'll see famines and plagues and border wars and all sorts of course, because the people with power are going to use their unearned wealth to try and keep you angry and down, because they're going to beat you over the head with the metaphorical stick. That's what they do. Take away their money. Eventually we can win for a little while, for another cycle, until humanity does this all over again.
Tom,
that's the world. That's like history in a nutshell.
That was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I could not agree with you more, what you just said. So I don't want to hold you any longer, because you already gave me an hour and a half of your precious time and like 2 cigars or something. So, yeah. Oh, sorry, I muted you because there is an echo.
Yeah. All I said was I just keep relighting the same cigar because I'm talking so much that I'm actually not smoking the damn thing, which is actually a good thing. So there we are.
But anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. I actually wanted to ask you a few more things, but I feel like this connection is really awkward from my side. It is what it is. I'm still grateful that we were able to connect. I very much appreciate your expertise and your time today and everything you said, because we need more people with this kind of mindset. You know, you have to think outside the box, and literally outside the box. That's what I think. So thank you, Tom, for joining me.
Thank you, Ani. It was lovely. Thank you. It was lovely, and I had a great time. And we overcame, well, StreamYard, which is Microsoft Teams rewrapped, and it's not good. It's not good technology. I tried it. I can't use it. So but we'll do our best. Take care, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. The link to Tom LUONGO, to his website, is down below the live stream. Thank you so much, and we see you next time. Bye, everyone.